Welcome to Management TV HSM Specials. Today we are with Gary Hamel, Director of Management Lab, a non-profit organization helping to reinvent management. Thank you, Gary, for being with us.
Pleasure, Eduardo.
What is the Management Lab?
Well, essentially, we're trying to help companies to become as experimental with how they manage, how they plan, allocate resources, budget, hire, and so on, as most of them already are in terms of how they develop and test new products or new ad campaigns. I mean, the reality is that most companies kind of take management mostly for granted and don't think about their management processes and systems as avenues for reinvention, don't think about management as something that can help them build a competitive advantage. So they kind of tend to just go along incrementally changing things at the margin, but don't often step back and say, are there opportunities to really fundamentally reinvent the way we do the work of management?
And do you think we need to reinvent management? What would we need to do so?
I think the three reasons, briefly, Eduardo, where the things that are actually driving us to do it. It's not only a matter of can we, I think it's more a matter of now we must. One is I think companies today are confronted with a new set of challenges that cannot be met with the old management model. Companies are challenged to be much more adaptable, to change more rapidly, more deeply than ever before. Number two, in a world of hyper-competition, they have to learn how to innovate continuously, constantly, everywhere. That's not a natural thing for most organizations. And then number three, if you want to get the best people working for you, the smartest, most motivated people, you actually have to create a climate that really encourages people to give their very, very best. You can't treat people like semi-programmable robots anymore. You really have to create an environment where they want to give you the gifts of their passion, their creativity. So all of those challenges, becoming more adaptable, deeply innovative, creating engaging places to work, those are things that our old management model is not very good at delivering. So I think that's kind of one reason. I think we have an opportunity to do this now because there are a lot of new tools out there, new tools of social networking and collaboration, opinion markets, the wikis, the blogs, that tell us there's other ways of getting human beings together and getting them to work collaboratively than the old kind of hierarchical system. So I think we have some new tools that make this possible. And then thirdly, you have a new generation of folks coming to work today that simply don't want to work in the old hierarchical models. So all those three things together, I think have made the reinvention of management an imperative.
What do you call the old hierarchical model?
Well, I think, it was called the bureaucratic model. And in a sense, you can think of management just as a technology. It's a social technology, but it's just a technology for getting groups of people to do things. And I think what we often kind of forget is that technology was invented to solve a very particular kind of problem, which was productivity and efficiency.
Okay.
So how do you do things at scale in the same way over and over again, using individuals, if you go back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, using individuals that didn't have many skills and often weren't very well educated. So the problem was efficiency, the answer was bureaucracy. The problem has now changed. Yes, you still have to be efficient and productive, but that really, in most economies and for most companies, that is not really what is going to help you stand out. So we have new challenges, and now we need some new technologies, some new social technologies that will help us get the best out of people and do more than be merely efficient.
Interesting. Because I'm thinking, even 2,000 years ago, the empires also had bureaucracy, and the Egyptians built pyramids, I imagine, with similar tools, management tools, than Ford was Ford.
In fact, if you go back through human history, I think you're absolutely right. There really were only two ways of organizing human effort at scale.
Yeah.
One was the bureaucracy, and you would have found that in the Roman army or under the pharaohs, and that was very effective for doing, things that were huge but were made up of very simple, completely repetitive steps. And then, of course, you had markets, because as far back in human history, people were trading and coming together and so on. And so both of those have advantages and disadvantages. Bureaucracies are really good at doing things that are very predictable and simply you need just a massive effort to get them done. Markets are pretty good at getting the resources in the right place at the right time. But they also both have limits. And now we have the possibility of kind of a third way here, but using the power of social networks and the internet and all these new communication tools to collaborate in ways that both allow us to do things at scale, but help us also preserve our individuality and our sense of choice over what we do and with whom we work. And that's that's something that humans have not had those tools before.
I'm thinking, with all the innovation we see in the marketplace, in technology and science, nobody planned for that innovation. Individuals or communities, small communities did them. Why do we have to plan for management innovation? Why didn't small groups just develop new forms of management according to the new challenges of the business?
Well, I guess a couple
Maybe
of things
it's in
there.
our DNA not to be that way, to behave like tribes, or to behave like we've always done for the
I mean, there's
last
certain
100,000
things
years.
that are hardwired into how human beings behave. And I would say one of the things that is hardwired most of all is A, the desire to have a certain level of autonomy, B, the desire to be part of a small community, not something huge, but a small thing where you know me and I know you, and there's that trust and so on. The sense of working on things that are meaningful and important to us and so on. So I think in many ways, the work of reinventing management is trying to go back to some of those things that got lost as we bureaucratized, as we started to treat people like machines and not human beings, and say, gee, we still need the efficiency, we still need the productivity, but in a way, how do we do it without rendering our organizations less human than the people who work there? Because, if you think about it, most human beings are pretty adaptable. I mean, I know people, that in mid-career, they take a new job, they move across continents, they learn a language, right? They really reinvent themselves. Everybody today has a chance to be an innovator. If you're not writing a blog, you're maybe laying out your garden at home, or you're doing something else, writing poetry. So that's pretty deep in the human makeup. And then, of course, everyone has a story. People aren't engaging. The story is all the way back in human history. This is how we interacted with each other. But something happens when we go to work in a way that our organizations are less adaptable, less innovative, and less engaging than we are. So, that suggests to me it doesn't have to be this way.
You get sanitized when you get into the job. Only a few items, efficiency, effectiveness, are important, and the rest are the free time things.
Fine, good enough. If you go back over the last 100 years, learning how to make things with perfect quality, perfect replicability. This is an amazing human accomplishment. And if you look at the increases in purchasing power and in factor productivity over the last 100 years, I mean, it's just unprecedented. So let's be very proud. Let's celebrate the fact we've done this. But now's the time to move on.
HSM Specials estrena su nuevo horario en la pantalla. De lunes a viernes, descubre entrevistas con las mentes brillantes que están cambiando el mundo toda la semana. Ahora puedes sintonizar nuevas entrevistas con el guionista Robert McKee, el director del proyecto Genesis Advisors Michael Watkins, el reconocido autor Pat Lencioni y el exitoso cineasta George Lucas, y muchos más. El fin de semana, revive todos los capítulos en un horario dedicado a los grandes personajes del mundo de los negocios. HSM Specials en Management TV.
So you need creativity, and you need passion, you need a lot of characteristics that big corporations lose, and therefore are less adaptive to change. It's interesting because a lot of the new success stories started as garage companies, not only on the technology side, but Whole Foods or other retailers as well. But when they grow, it's in the growth that's their risk of losing their advantages. There's something in the size that kills the rest of or that challenges the management model. How can you be big and at the same time keep those characteristics that are generally associated with a small company?
So I think that's correct, that if you look at most companies, if you thought about kind of two dimensions here, one is being adaptability and innovation and so on, and one is kind of efficiency and scale. What happens as companies grow, they start out generally, quite adaptable, quite innovative, and then as they grow, they kind of become less so, but they become more efficient. And in a way, companies, as they grow, often trade away units of innovation, trade away units of adaptability for units of efficiency and predictability and so on. So the question is this a zero-sum game, right? Is this just an inevitable trade-off?
Yes.
And I think for a long time the answer probably was yes, because the only way we knew how to coordinate and control was with standard operating procedures and hierarchy. You rein in people, you don't give them a lot of discretion and so on. But now with new technology, where instead of being a hierarchical review, I can do a peer review, where everyone in the organization, rather than depending on my boss to tell me what to do, everyone in the company can understand what's the mission, what's the target, and write themselves into that story. So I think that the technologies are going to allow us increasingly for the first time to be able to do things at scale, but without the weight and the bureaucratic drag of an army of overseers and middle managers. You see this in something, you know, like the growth of Wikipedia or Linux or any open source project where, you know, things are
It's
done.
a network model.
It's much more of a network model, and that is in a way kind of a direct affront or a direct challenge to the organizational model we've used since the pyramids were built. And that's, you know, some people are going to get this, and some people are going to find it very difficult to get their heads around it. But I think it is now, you know, it is increasingly possible to do both. Now, do I think that tomorrow we're going to be able to build, you know, a Boeing or an Airbus using a completely networked, peer-based model? I don't think so. But that's clearly the way, you know, the tide is going. And, you know, every generation, particularly if you've grown up with something that hasn't changed in a long time, you tend to believe that that is the only way the world can work. I mean, when, you know, constitutional democracy started to be formed, when that idea started to grow, there were many good-hearted, honest people around the world who said, you know, you're heading for disaster. There is no way for people to govern themselves. That is, like, impossible. You couldn't imagine that. In the same way that a decade ago it would have been impossible for many executives to believe you could create complex software with a, you know, with a peer-based model. So I think over the next few years we're going to constantly go back and forth and ask ourselves, okay, is this just some belief that's a legacy of history, or is this something that's hardwired in human beings that there's no way around? But I'd rather start with the assumption that a whole lot of it is legacy rather than our inherent nature.
We don't think that we have a limited set of management principles that we are applying. We think we're just doing things.
Well, and I think the other thing that you know, people have to be honest about is often organizations are run for the benefit of the bureaucratic class. Right? I'm not a Marxist, but I definitely believe, I don't believe in capital and labor, but I believe in most companies you have a bureaucratic class, the managers, the vice presidents, the senior vice presidents, you have employees. I mean, think about this. Virtually every management book, management article in Harvard Business Review, all the stuff out there on the bookshelf, all of those things are written to managers about employees. This is how you get more out of your employees, this is how you measure them, this is how you inspire them. And there's almost a sense that, guys, we're all employees, right? Unless you own the thing, we're all employees. There's not some, but for sure, if you've been to the right schools and you've learned to crawl your way up the hierarchy and you now have the positional power and the prerogatives, you live a different kind of life in a different kind of class. And I think real innovation in management is going to be tough because it's going to challenge a lot of those folks to give up some of their power, to give up some of their prerogatives, and yet I think it's inevitable. Because unless you do that, we can't build companies that can change at the pace of change.
Interesting. But I think I would add to that, that in today's organization, not only we have old principles, old management principles, but we have two other things that are very old as well. One is the legal structure. How do we share the money? You know, corporations, employee, service providers. Should we reinvent that as well? And thirdly, accounting. Accounting is a medieval way of, you know, more for traders than any other thing. And that's not really measuring value. Do we have to reinvent accounting for a network society as well? Can we reinvent management without the other two?
Yeah, I think it's all part of a system. You know, if you talk to at least what I believe are some of the most progressive companies today, and you talk to their leaders, and I'm thinking about people like Richard Branson or John Mackey at Whole Foods, they will tell you again and again that employees come first, customers come second, and shareholders come third. In fact, Vineet Nair, who's the chief executive of a very progressive Indian IT services company, stood up at the company's big annual customer event and said, I'm going to tell you, you folks come number 2. You are not my first priority. My first priority is to give my people the tools, the incentives, the support they need to do fantastic things for you. Yeah. There was a time, and in many cases it's still true, where companies really were run for the benefit of the managers, not the shareholders. And you could see companies that went for year after year with very mediocre performance and no heads rolled, and they really didn't take that very seriously. So I mean, I think it's a good thing that we started to take shareholders more seriously. But as we so often do, we let the pendulum swing too far. And so I think today, many times managers mistake the scoreboard for the game. Mm-hmm. Shareholder wealth is a really important scoreboard. It's our measure on whether you're using society's resources wisely. And yet, shareholders don't create any value, any wealth, whatever. In fact, legally, they are the residual claimants, exactly. Right? They're not the prime, they're the residual ones after you've paid employees and suppliers and whatever else. And yet we kind of elevated, we turned that thing around. I remember Bob Nardelli, who came from GE, then ran Home Depot, and now is at Chrysler. He was quoted one time as in the midst of some troubles at Home Depot as saying, there's no one who is more aligned with shareholders than I. And I read that and I thought, well, first of all, that's tautological. I mean, given all your share options, of course you are.
I am a shareholder.
Yeah, I am a shareholder, and I care. But I said, I would have much rather heard you say, I am totally aligned with employees and customers, because that's where the value, as a shareholder. Don't tell me you're aligned with me. I don't care. I mean, I can move my money somewhere else at a time. What I want to know is you're aligned. You're in the stores every day. You're talking to the customers. You're inspiring those employees. You're making it easier for them to do their jobs. You're giving them more discretion to fix the problems that need fixing. Then I have some chance you can turn this thing around.
Where should we look for reinventing management? You mentioned markets, but where else can we look at?
Well, I think you have to go back almost to first principles, because one of the reasons I think it's been so hard to build companies that are adaptable and innovative is the companies we have are built on a set of principles that, like standardization and hierarchy and specialization, that were focused on reliability and efficiency and so on. We need some alternatives to those. I mean, we need to complement those with some that are focused more on adaptability and engagement and so on. So in understanding how to do this, you have to go look at the things in our world that are highly engaging or highly innovative or highly adaptable. So you look at markets which are much more flexible than hierarchies. They're much better at getting resources behind the new ideas than a typical big hierarchy is. You might go you might want to study how auctions work today online, because auctions are very good at matching buyers and sellers. And in a company, my problem may be, how do I match ideas and talent, or ideas and resources to get things done? Well, traditionally, if you had an idea, you fought your way up through the hierarchy. They controlled all the resources. Maybe you might want to turn that around instead and say, well, what if we gave everyone who had a discretionary budget in our company, what if we let them take 1 or 2% of that budget and be an angel investor and invest in any idea across the company that was interesting to them, right? So that's an idea I come from looking at an eBay, for example. Say, well, how does that apply to management? You take something like the Grameen Bank, which of course is this wonderful story of microcredit and so on. It's a story I've known since the company was founded. I had been following it. And yet when I look at that story, for me the lesson is less about how do you lift people out of poverty, as important as that is, but as a management person, I say, well, gee, how is it that some middle-aged woman in Bangladesh has an easier time getting a small amount of money to try something than the average first-level employee in a Global 1000 company? How can that make any sense?
Interesting.
So I think, if you want to reinvent management, the last place you look is in existing the big companies, because, they're like, that's not where the inspiration is going to come from. But you look for places where you see human capability being unleashed, people getting things done, where you find almost an absence of organization, an absence of management and hierarchy, and then say, okay, gee, how do they accomplish that?
En marzo, los sábados y domingos son fines de semana de mucho management. Te traemos una nueva programación exclusiva para arrancar el año con todo. Y un horario exclusivo para que repases las ideas de las mentes brillantes del mundo empresarial. Cada semana, nuevos capítulos de Charlie Rose, Siéntate a la mesa con Barack Obama, Tommy Lee Jones, Roger Federer, Jude Law, Muhtar Kent y Malcolm Gladwell, entre muchos otros. No te pierdas los entretelones de la estafa de Madoff en The Madoff Affair y la crisis financiera que cuenta la caída del sistema financiero en Inside the Milltown. Así es el fin de semana en Management TV.
There are a lot of academic studies that will tell you that somewhere between 25 and 50% of all executive decisions are wrong. And this is the executives themselves admitting this, so the figure could be higher.
Probably could be higher.
You know, and now you look, you know, the online opinion markets, you go to something like InTrade, where they make a market in almost anything. Right now, if you, you know, follow the presidential elections, you can see odds on who's going to be, you know, the next president or the Democratic nominee. And those markets have an enormous predictive capacity. And so, you know, the question I'm asking in organizations today is not how to use those kinds of markets to predict sales. That's kind of easy. But, you know, if you have a big strategic decision you have to make, do we go out and buy company X? You know, create a security around that. The security will pay off in 5 years if the thing has been a success. Against some metrics, it won't pay off if it wasn't. Let people buy and sell that security. The price of that security will tell you how much confidence people have in this thing actually paying off. We have to find ways of aggregating wisdom around the big strategic decisions, because, you know, no longer can you afford those to be made by, you know, a handful of people with their own biases and their own information. We wouldn't, you know, make any important political decisions that way, but that's still how we make decisions in companies.
You say it's important to understand or to motivate the passion in people, the passion in the whole organization, to bring in words like love into the business language. Do you think it's possible?
You know, I think it's possible. You know, you can measure some of the outcomes. You know whether you're innovative after the fact.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult. How do you measure passion? How do you measure trust? How do you measure? I mean, there are proxies. But I can tell you, even when we have proxies, those are not the measurements people, you know, look at. But, you know, you look at a company like Apple, what they care about more than anything else is how do you marry art and technology? How do you do things of amazing beauty? And, you know, and when you talk to their people there, that's the way they think. And it's kind of like a no compromises, like, let's make something so beautiful, so seductive. People love to hold it, love to look at it. If you get your priorities right, you know, at the end of the day, you better keep score and you got to do this profitably. But I think the companies that are going to win, that are going to appear authentic and are going to appear innovative and so on, are the ones that start by saying, how do we do something that resonates with those deep human, right? You know, like Whole Foods. How do I build a company where you know you can trust us? How do I, like Apple, how do I build a company that you know we just care passionately about doing something that's beautiful? If my strategy, if my vision is oriented around those things, you know, I still got to run it like a business, but I have a much higher chance, I think, of having a really breakout success than if I start from the other end and say, you know what, how do I make sure I'm really diligent here and that...
And efficient and low cost. Imagine I were a businessman, an owner of a furniture company, mid-size or even small-size company. What recommendation would you give me to start reinventing my management style?
You know, I would say the first thing
because I would love to be Steve Jobs, but I mean...
But you're not.
But I'm not.
And most people aren't.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the dilemmas I think we have in management is, if you look over the last 10, 20 years, how much of the books and the gurus and so on have all focused on leadership. I think it's almost a red herring, right? I mean, it's not that we shouldn't, you know, try to, you know, find people who have these amazing capabilities, but the fact of the matter is, most of us are not going to be Jack Welch. We're not going to be Steve Jobs. They're, you know, 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million. And so I think what you have to ask instead is, how do you create a company that can succeed, can thrive, even with relatively mediocre leadership? So for me, the first thing Monday morning is, you know, let's assume, let me start with the assumption that people down on the front lines, they want to create things that are beautiful. They want to do the right things for customers. They want to feel that they're making a difference. What I have to ask those people is, if you look at the way we manage you, the way we reward you and measure you, and the systems for making decisions, you tell me what is getting in the way here. Because I think the best people to reinvent management are not managers. The best people to reinvent management are the people who are struggling under the yoke of all these systems and all these things that so often, I mean, that was Deming's fundamental insight, wasn't it? You know, Deming, the great godfather of the quality movement.
Yes.
He said, people want to make things of high quality. And if you ask them what's getting in the way, they'll tell you. Better yet, if you let them fix those things, they'll fix them, right? You got to put in some guidelines. So that, you know, manager of a small furniture company, that's the first thing. I want him down there with frontline people saying, you know, what are we doing in the way we manage, measure? What are we doing that is getting in the way for you achieving all you think we could achieve there? And, you know, one of the things that I think companies increasingly will need to do is take whatever management process you have, anything in HR, in finance, in the IT, lay out those management processes. I mean, describe them, dimension them, you know, map them so people know this person gets involved, this is the information that comes in, here's the decision tools we use, here's how we measure the success of this project. And I think people across the organization have the right to hack those. I mean, not literally to just like maliciously tear them up, but to look at them and say, you know what, you know, you say you want to be more adaptable, but when I look at the planning process, you know, even in our little furniture company, it's you and your two uncles who sit together every year and think about this stuff, and you guys are all 50 years old, and you don't have, so like, how is that going to help us? And so, I mean, that's my first principles. You have to ask the people who are giving their lives to your organization, what are we doing to you, often with good intention and inadvertently, but what are we getting in the way of that is stopping you from doing the very best that you can? Very interesting. Obviously, the first thing would be recognize that you need to open your mind, that you have to change, that you have to deconstruct the old principles to be ready for the new ones. And as a closing question, if passion is so important, what is your passion in life now? In whatever profession or wherever you sit, all of us want to make some kind of difference. But I think the challenge is, whatever you're doing, you have to commit yourself to a problem that looks almost insurmountable, that looks much bigger than you are. You have no right to even think you're going to change it. But if you have the guts to do that, you wake up every morning kind of knowing that you have to do more, you have to figure out some way of tackling this, you need a different approach, you need to be able to leverage other people. And so, you know, early in my career, I was at the University of Michigan in the 1970s when for the first time the American car industry was getting pummeled by their new competitors. And I saw my neighbors lose their houses and lose their jobs, and I saw the decay of downtown Detroit happen. And suddenly, competitiveness was not the academic issue for me. And I think the early stuff I did, you know, all the stuff in HBR and so on, it was really driven by that sense of, you know, this has a huge impact on our prosperity, on how people live, on their families, on our communities, and you got to be globally competitive. The middle part of my career really focused more on strategy, innovation, and so on, was, you know, really driven by this thought that human beings are just innately creative, have a right to be creative, yet there's so much in their organization that works against this. Kind of heavily influenced by data. I mean, other people have seen this for a long time, but I only came across it a couple of years ago, that basically shows how disengaged people are in their work, how little of their emotion and their passion, their creativity they actually bring to work every day. And I think if you're a manager and you see that data, you know, that maybe 10 or 20% of people in an economy are highly engaged, it's just fundamentally scandalous. For me, that is management's moonshot today. And it's not just something we need to do because it's a moral imperative. It is now a business imperative, because unless your organization encourages people to bring those capabilities of passion and initiative and creativity to work every day, our only other choice is we all join the race to the bottom, and we all, like, one day we're all employing Chinese prison labor, and that's like the future of enterprise. Well, that can't be the right thing. So that's what is kind of driving me at the moment. How do you create companies that are as human as the people who work there? And Peter Medawar, famous zoologist, Nobel Prize winner, once said, dull and piffling problems yield dull and piffling answers. So my view, you know, whatever level of organization you are, whether you're in academics, consulting, profession, life is too short to work on inconsequential problems. So
that's a great challenge. I think Mr. Brown from the furniture business could also say, let's engage people in whatever they do, and let's have them happier at work as well. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure,
really
Eduardo.
a pleasure. Thank you very much for being with us today.
A continuación, My Business. Solo por Management TV. La nueva generación de clientes exige nuevas tácticas de ventas.
There is a battle between the strategies of the corporation and the forces of the marketplace.
En un día con Neil Rackham verás cómo aumentar tus ventas a partir de un pensamiento estratégico innovador.
Selling is value creation, not value communication.
Descubre el nuevo paradigma de ventas. Special Management Program. Ventas. 28 de abril, México DF. Organiza HSM.
Hello and welcome to the program.